You're listening to Spark Hustle Flow, the podcast that teaches money pros to launch, grow, and yes, even scale your virtual financial service business. And I'm your host, Kimberly Stevenson. Let's dive in and get started. Hello, my friends. We're on episode 22 of the Spark Hustle Flow podcast this week. Welcome, and thanks for joining me and listening into this chat that I had with Jacqueline Sinfield, my first international interview. Jacqueline lives north of the border in Canada, and I absolutely love her spirit. Jacqueline specializes in helping adults with ADHD manage their symptoms naturally so that they can succeed in all areas of life, including in their careers, their studies, their home, and their relationships. She used to be a registered nurse, and she holds a bachelor's degree in psychology. The name of her blog and her book is Untapped Brilliance, and she has helped thousands of adults with ADHD. So I thought it would be great to tap Jacqueline's brilliance and talk to her about how entrepreneurs can really deal with the everyday distractions that we face, even those of us who have not been diagnosed with ADHD. During our chat, we talk about things like the role self-awareness plays in our ability to focus and how one-size-fits-all systems will probably not help you if you really struggle with distractions in your business. We talk about how being easily distracted is particularly difficult for those of us in the money space and how linear thinkers can work towards overcoming those challenges. She shared one really practical idea that can show results almost immediately, so make sure you listen out for that one. We even dive into busting some myths about those who have been diagnosed with ADHD and the types of roles that they may or may not be suited for, including finance. I learned so much from talking with Jacqueline, and I'm actually putting her advice into action in my own business. I'm sure you're going to feel the same way once you listen, so why don't I let you just go and do that? Here's my chat with Jacqueline about overcoming distractions in your business. Hi, Jacqueline. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you for having me, Kimberly.
Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate you agreeing to come and talk with me about this. I don't know if it's really heavy or not, but it definitely seems like something that so many of us struggle with about this particular topic. And so we're talking about overcoming distractions in your business today, and I'm super excited to talk with you.
Awesome. And it doesn't need to be heavy, like distractions are it's like a muscle, mastering your distractions. So it doesn't need to be heavy. It could be something that you can approach with oh yeah, I get to do this, master this thing.
I love that already. I'm even more excited now. So we told our listeners, we shared a little bit about your background with our listeners, but why don't you take a moment and tell us in your own words, how did you get started doing this type of work?
Okay, so I am a coach for adults with ADHD, so attention deficit disorder. And a lot of people don't realize that adults have it too. So everyone's familiar that children have or can have ADHD, and it also goes by the name ADD, but that was an older name when someone's diagnosed with ADHD. Now the official term is ADHD, but if you hear them, people use them interchangeably. So I work with adults. It is genetic. That doesn't mean to say if you've got ADHD that your children will automatically have it, but if you have it, there's a good chance one or both of your parents had ADHD too. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's news to me. I never knew. This is the first time that I'm actually hearing that it could be hereditary.
Yeah. Now, it might not be. There's other ways that you might get ADHD. So a lot of people now, thankfully, modern technology, if someone's born prematurely, in the past they might have, unfortunately died, passed away, whereas now they're being kept alive. But if someone's been born, say, like 30 weeks, then they might develop ADHD, and in that case their parents might not necessarily have had it. Also, if someone had say a car accident in the 30s, 40s, and if they got a head injury, they might develop ADHD as a result of that, but that would have come. So not always, but a lot of the time, yeah, it's passed on through the families.
That's super interesting. And so I am going to kind of throw myself on the guillotine for a moment and share something transparently that I have done in the past. And I feel like maybe that it just probably wasn't the nicest thing to do. And so I have this really bad habit of saying, I think I have adult onset ADD, just because I get distracted very easily. And I say it kind of tongue in cheek because it's not something that I've ever really like gone to a medical professional to, have diagnosed or anything like that. I just tend to forget things or am easily, pulled in different directions. And I think it's probably more so from taking on too many tasks or, different things at the same time. But I say that I've said that in the past. And so having just listened to you describe what ADD or ADHD really is and how it's diagnosed, I will definitely make a concerted effort to really never make that comment again, right? And so thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. So we are talking about generally being distracted in our business today. And we are going to touch a little bit more on kind of those of us who may actually have a medical diagnosis of ADD or ADHD. But I definitely want to talk about just being distracted in a general sense and how that could impact us in our business and hold us back or keep us stuck or just present challenges as entrepreneurs. So my first question to you is, in general, how do we know, how can we tell when our distractions are what's really keeping us stuck? Can we talk about that a little bit? Like, how do we know it's that we're distracted or it's something else?
Okay, so that's a good question. So first of all, I think it's helpful to think of distractions in two different ways. So, the opposite of distraction is being able to focus and concentrate. So if you're able to focus and concentrate, then you can like zoom into something, a task, and make progress on it. So and that feels good because you're moving an important project forwards in your business. So that is sort of seconds, hours, minutes, however long. But then you can also get distracted in your business thinking like, oh, I really want to do this, and you sign up for a program, or I really want to get really good at CEO, and then like, oh, hang on a minute, but YouTube's where I need a YouTube channel. And so you can get distracted in your business like that, but then you can also get distracted like trying to in at any point during the day. So your question was, could you repeat your question again? Sorry.
How do we generally know, or how are we able to identify that, either like you were just explaining, is it a broad distraction, like what people I guess refer to as shiny object syndrome, versus I have difficulty concentrating, and that inability to concentrate is what is holding me back? What's a really maybe a good way to pinpoint that?
Yeah, so I think first of all, if we think of like somebody that wants to sit down and write something, maybe they want to write a new page on their website. Okay, so in order to do that, what they would need to do is sit down at the laptop and type and like get the words out of their head. So in that scenario, there's a lot of things that could be getting in the way of them being able to get those words out onto paper. So Could be they're getting external distractions, maybe the phone's ringing, or that would be an example. Or there's a loud noise, or lots of loud noises. So they're all external distractions that are diverting your attention. That being said, some people do really well when there is some external noise. So a lot of people, like maybe when you were growing up and you'd be playing really loud music and your mom was like, how can you concentrate when you're got that on? Well, some people actually do concentrate and be able to focus really well when they've got background noise. So all depends, it's very much tailored towards you. But you're not really going to be able to focus if you've got like the phone ringing and you feel like you need to answer it. So there's external distractions, and then there's also internal distractions. And that might be like, well, I need to write this page for my website, but I've just remembered it's my brother's birthday. I better go on Amazon and order him something. And then, okay, I did that. Oh, but it's garbage day. Let me just go and run and take the garbage out. So those internal distractions might be because you're kind of scared that if you don't do those things now, you'll forget. And maybe your brother's birthday will come and go before you remember to get him that present. So you better act now. Same with the garbage, So those type, they feel real, like that's like you distracting yourself. And so in that case, you can develop little systems to sort of remind you. So for example, this is what I tell all my clients: when you're focusing on something like this, have a paper and pen and like a notepad, like this is its official job. And like, oh, okay, brother's birthday, buy present. You just write that down, and that notepad, rather than a scrap piece of paper, its sole job is to remind you of things that you'll do after you've done this focus and concentration work. Your brain doesn't really like sitting and focusing and concentrating because it has to use its brain juice, and we're all about preservation and we want to keep that for an emergency, and it's hard. So the first approximately 5 to 8 minutes, you're going to be sitting down, and it doesn't feel that exciting. It's much more exciting to like run off and do things, and I'll go and do this. Like that's much more of an exciting, stimulating environment. But if you can just sit with that discomfort between 5 and 8 minutes approximately, then you allow yourself to get into the groove of the task, and then you can end up enjoying it. So that, if you can really give yourself the time to be that window of time to be able to get into that groove, have a system in place so that if you do think of something, then write it down. Sit in the, if you're someone that doesn't like external noises, then obviously switch your phone off and make a conducive environment so that you can focus. There's also something else that we need to consider, and that's emotions. So if you had an argument with someone that you love, then it's going to be much harder to be able to focus. And also, if you're feeling like, who am I to put myself out on the web, or like any sort of self-doubt, that can really get in the way of being able to focus on those things. So,
wow. So much to unpack there. So here are my takeaways, and tell me if I get it right or if I miss a piece. So there are, it sounds like, 3 specific types of stimuli that focus on or make it a challenge for you to deal with distractions. So they're external, internal, and then potentially like emotionally based kind of stimuli, and that they're all very different. And depending on the project that you're working on at the particular time, there are ways, there are things that you can do to put things into place that will help you with that. And so if you're dealing with something like those internal distractions or internal stimuli, something that as simple as a notepad beside you and writing down what you need to write down, and then going back to the task at hand, versus if it's something that's external, like the telephone ringing was your example. It could be a matter of doing what I do, put my phone on do not disturb or flip it over when I start a project, so I am not disturbed during that time. So really knowing yourself well enough to know how to help yourself through something before you even jump in is what it sounds like, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And not only that, you can get even better at knowing yourself. So, for example, I have a little course, it's called Focus on Demand, and that is all about really getting to know like what works so you've got a repeatable system, because that's the other thing. Sometimes if there's a deadline, like an external deadline, suppose you've got to do your taxes, most people would be motivated by that deadline, and so then it's much easier to be able to focus, say no to other things like, no, I've got to do my taxes, sit down, maybe work for many hours in one sitting. But then people think, oh, but I could do it then. Why can't I do it now? Well, there isn't a deadline and that sense of external accountability and possibly negative consequences, then it can get harder. So what you really want to do is to try and make this thing like really get to know yourself. So if you're someone that is motivated by external deadlines, like, okay, well, that's good, I was able to focus then, how can I focus now without that? Like, what else can I do? So it's like you're constantly learning about how you operate.
That's, you know what, that's so true for me. I think I taught myself to be motivated by external deadlines, especially when I was back in college. And I knew when most of my assignments would be due, like a particular day of the week. They would always, it would be the due date would be like Sunday at 11:55 p.m. or something like that. And I would rarely start the assignment before 4 or 5 o'clock on a Sunday. And I did well throughout, college and my master's program. And I think in some ways that taught me that I didn't have to start things really early in order to perform well. And so I created this procrastination monster. And so now in business, I have to force myself not to do that, not to wait until the last minute. But I think I created that, within myself back when I was in school. And so I'm just wondering how many of us, that are entrepreneurial who have worked well under pressure, have we kind of created that habit within ourselves? And now
yeah, so that's a really good question. So people with ADHD are very much like that. So they know that when push comes to shove, they can absolutely go all out and achieve that. And like, we're not saying you have ADHD, but that is something that lots of people do without an ADD diagnosis. It's kind of like human nature, because all of a sudden that sort of, it galvanizes into action. And you make a really good point, you got a really good grade, so then it becomes a self-perpetuating cycle. Like, why would I like spend like 2 weeks over this when I can just pull out all the stops and get a really good grade in 5 hours? And you know what, some people actually do better doing it in a short window like that, because what can happen then, they can sort of like get a bit lost in sort of research and make it overly complicated. Whereas when you're on a tight line, your brain doesn't have to like, oh, is this important or not? It just kind of, like, oh, I'll just, you're not consciously thinking about prioritizing, it just seems to automatically happen. So when we're talking about that for entrepreneurs, because it's okay to do it up to a certain point, and I think university is probably the last time that you can do it. And even then, like, you couldn't write like a really long thesis in a short window of time. So then as an entrepreneur, what can happen is you can set up your environment. If you know that you're someone that responds well to deadlines, you can set up deadlines. So for example, if you're working on a big project that's probably going to take about 2 months, just as an example, what you can do is have weekly check-ins with your clients and just say, hey, Mondays, and that is like a little mini deadline. And the clients think you're awesome because you're giving them regular updates. But for you too, it's like a really good way to make sure that you're on task and not going to leave it till the last minute.
I love that. I absolutely love that, because I think where I've set myself up to fail and what I see often with clients as well is we set those milestones, but we don't have that external accountability piece, or we think that bringing the client into it some way kind of outs us, right? And like, puts us holds a mirror up to us in some ways, and we don't want our clients to necessarily know that we may struggle with it. But I love how you framed it, as just like this checkpoint with them, and the client doesn't necessarily need to know why you're doing it.
Exactly.
And it helps you in the meantime, right? Yeah.
Exactly. So some people, you can set appointments more often, say with accounting. Like, I know you're in accounting, but just suppose someone that isn't, maybe they have an annual important appointment with their accountant, but why wait for a full year? If maybe you make a quarterly appointment. That's, there's all sorts of ways to include accountability. If you've got a best friend, they might not be the best people to hold you accountable. And also you can set yourself deadlines, but just because you set yourself a deadline doesn't mean to say you're going to honor it. So that, again, it's a question of knowing you. So a friend might not be the best person, because you all know, like, oh, well, they won't mind, they'll understand.
Yeah, I think it's always better to make that person someone who is not, I wouldn't necessarily go as far as hold your feet to the fire, but someone whose opinion in that specific moment is really important to you, and that will, like, just them being a part of it is enough of a stimulus for you to stay on task. So I love that. So our listenership, for the most part, is our money pros, right? So tax pros, bookkeepers, CPAs, financial advisors, all of those types of folks. And so we have to be, by training and by nature, very detail oriented. And so I think that there is this stigma for those of us who may struggle somewhat with being distracted or being easily distracted. It may take us longer to get things done because we are pulled in, a bunch of different directions, or, we struggle with staying kind of focused and on task, right? And so can we talk about that to some degree? I know that the sense is that, accountants and, tax folks, we are super head down, focused and concentrating all the time. But I'd like to, kind of bust that myth. Not all of us are great at that, are great at staying, focused for long periods of time, long stretches of time to get certain projects done. So can we talk about some of the challenges that more linear or numbers oriented entrepreneurs or business folks may struggle with distractions, and why that might be?
Okay, so what I think would be a really good idea is to try and, like, rather than be a stereotypical, like, figure out who you are, like, not just Kimberly, but everybody, and sort of include that as part of your identity, rather than have this, like, oh, this is what an accountant's supposed to do, and so if you can sort of play around like, oh, okay, so I'm an accountant, but I also really like to party, and I also really, so you've got a full spectrum rather than like, oh, accountants are supposed to crunch numbers and just sit down and work straight hours. So try and embrace every aspect of you, and that will be helpful to sort of shirk any of these preconceived ideas that have been around for many, many years. Then the other thing to do is to get a timer, like a kitchen timer, and that's its sole job is to keep you on task. Now, most people I work with can work, and I'm including myself in this, for 30 minutes. So if you set your timer and work for 30 minutes. Some people can honestly work a little bit longer, consistently, maybe 45 minutes, but I wouldn't set it longer than 45 minutes, and don't change it. Oh, today I'll do 30, I'll do 45. Like, just get to know which is best for you. If you're not sure, start with 30. So then you're going to work in 30-minute chunks, so like deep concentrated work for 30 minutes. And then when the timer goes off, have a mini break. And during that mini break, like, get up, drink a glass of water, use the bathroom, do so. You could even fold your laundry if you're working from home, but do not consume any new information. Don't check your phone, don't read the news, don't watch TV, anything screen, don't watch. And what happens then by doing that is you've given your brain a little break, but you haven't really got out of that focused concentration zone. So then when you come back, even though if you weren't actually thinking about what you were working on, you might suddenly make a little leap of like a problem because you were somehow, oh yeah, of course, that's exactly, why didn't I think of that sooner? And so that is more likely than if you went and watched 15 minutes of news, and that would have been consuming your mind. So then you come back and then do it all again for another 30 minutes, and just intersecting those 30 minutes. Because here's the thing, having the timer, that's a little deadline right there. And you'll get to, oh, I've only got 5 minutes. Or I feel like, oh, this is taking a long time. I'd rather not be doing this right now. And 15, I'm halfway there. So you can play like little games with yourself. And that's the other thing. You might say, well, just suppose if you're reading a book, then you're like, oh, I wonder if I could read 3 pages in 30 minutes. And then like, oh, look at me, I did 4 pages. Let me see if I, so you like play little games that creates a sense of urgency with the time. And you're not compromising your standards, but you're inserting a little bit of fun. So always have an objective at the beginning of the 30 minutes. And it's okay if you don't achieve it, but it's like just keeping things exciting.
I love that. And I love that you said use a kitchen timer, and I'll tell you why. So I actually have a little tomato kitchen timer in my office because I host co-working sessions for my clients, and we use the Pomodoro technique, and we use the timer, and we work in stretches. We do 25 on and 5 minutes off. And sometimes we've done 45, but typically we do 25 on, 5 minutes off. And it works like a charm. When I, instead of using the kitchen timer, try to use my phone, inevitably during the 5 minute break that we have, I start scrolling social media on my phone. And so it's not really giving my brain the break that it sounds like it really does need during that time. And so when you go back to work, it's, you've either broken the concentration stream that you had in place, or you just haven't rested your brain enough, right? To then be able to come back and allow yourself the space to have kind of those ahas or epiphanies or things that you didn't notice the first time around. So I'll have to go back to really just using the kitchen timer itself. And it's funny because the little tick, tick, tick tock that it makes, that's soothing in some ways as well. It's like white noise as you're working.
Yeah, Exactly. And then the thing with social media is that you'll be coming back and you'll be like, oh, but I really didn't like her dress, or whatever it is. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you're thinking about what you've just seen rather than, and then it's harder to focus because you're kind of resisting focus, because like there's a whole world out there that seems a whole lot more fun than the numbers that you're supposed to be working on.
I love that. That's awesome. Okay, so can we take a quick break and
Okay.
play a fun this or that game?
Oh, this or that. Okay, cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and we're doing the summer edition for all of our episodes for the summer, and we're asking everyone the exact same questions because I personally think it'll be fun to, at the end of the summer, kind of compare what everybody does, and it's really easy. So no thought, first thought that comes, just first thing that comes to your mind, just go ahead and blurt it out, okay?
Okay.
All right, let's go. So, flights or road trips?
Flights.
Mexico or the Caribbean?
Caribbean.
Sundresses or shorts?
Okay, I guess that depends, but I'm going to go with sundresses.
Poolside or beachside?
Beach.
Cocktails or smoothies?
Smoothies.
Jet skis or parasailing?
Parasailing.
Flip flops or strappy sandals?
Flip flops.
And ice cream or popsicles?
Ice cream.
Love it. Thank you. I think it's so much fun. And I think that I always think I know what people's answers are going to be. I have no idea why I think that, but I do. And usually I'm wrong. Usually I'm totally wrong. So, all right, just a couple more questions for you before we wrap up. Thanks for playing along. That was awesome. So, we talked about setting the timer for 30-minute stretches and then taking a quick break and doing something else that really doesn't kind of break the stream of the focus stream that you have going on. How many of those is recommended that you do at a time?
Okay. So that's such a good question. So this is just what I found. First of all, personally myself, and then I asked around, and then I've sort of validated this with 16 years of working with my clients. So when I was writing my book, I worked in 30-minute chunks, and I really wanted to write more than I actually was. And I was feeling bad. So I was doing 5 hours of 30-minute chunks, 4 hours, 4 to 5 hours. So that would be 8 or 10 30-minute chunks. But I just couldn't get myself to do any more. Like my brain, I would say my brain feels dead, which not a good analogy really, but it would just be completely fried after that. And then at the time my brother was doing his PhD, and I was like, James, how long can you focus? And he didn't know that what my findings was, and his was 4 hours. And then I met Dr. Halliwell, who is a big well-known ADD doctor. And I was telling him, and I can't remember exactly what he said because I don't want to misquote him, but it seemed very much in line with me and my brother's experience. So that's what I tell clients, 4 to 5 hours. Now, of course, if you've got a deadline, you're going to be able to maybe work 12 hours, although we don't really recommend that, but you could, some very unique situations. But I guarantee you, after you've done like a very big long stint, you're not going to be able to do the same the next day, because it comes down to the brain juice. So if someone's had a very intense, longer than those 4 to 5 hours, then it's going to fatigue them for the next day, and then you feel bad about yourself. So that consistency is, and of course you're going to perhaps have more work to do, but it's not that deep focus work.
Okay, because I was actually going to ask that question, because most of us have longer days than 4 to 5 hour work days, right? And so you're not saying that once you get through the 5 hours, then it's like hang everything up for the day and you're done and you can go and, put your feet up on the couch. It's just a different type of work. And so you want to save, it sounds like what you're saying is you want to save the most important work that you have to do it during that 4 to 5 hour stretch, and then maybe do some of the other things that you have on your plate that are maybe not as important or not as urgent for the time period outside of that. Did I get that right?
Yeah, and some tasks that you need to do don't really require you to be into that deep focus. So you might just a few quick emails like, yeah, confirmed, received it, thanks. That's not going to be required for you to do your deep focused work. So for
And
me, no,
go ahead.
No, go ahead, Kimberly.
So I was just going to ask, so is it easy then for most people to make that determination on what is the work that I need to focus on during this time and what's not? Do you find that your clients or anybody in general that struggles with distractions, do they have a difficulty deciding what's the work that I need to focus on during that 4 to 5 hour stretch?
Yeah. So there's a brilliant book and it's called Deep Work by, I think it's Cal Newport, and it's a really, really good. It's going to, if you'll feel very motivated to do deep work, which is what we're talking about. So deep work is things that will move you forward. So for me, it's writing, and it sounds like for your audience it would be those numbers, like when you have to like really do, so it's like your bread and butter. So yes, moving things forward, but it's yeah, so it is different for everybody and it's not always easy to figure it out, but it once you know it, it will always be the same.
Gotcha. So the type of work that moves the needle in your business, whether it's the commercial side, the client facing work that needs to get done, or it's a project that you might be working on the back end of your business, but it's going to move you forward and allowing you to do more client work is what it sounds like to me. But the name of the book is Deep Work, and you said the author's name was Cal.
I think it's Newport.
Okay, well, if we will definitely link to that book in the show notes, so folks can pick that up. And so we will either you can get that information to us, or we'll do the research because it sounds like it's fascinating.
Oh,
It absolutely does.
yeah, it really, really is.
Okay, so then let me ask you this: how does one, and this is, I think this question, I want to ask it because there may be people in our audience who think that they should be tested to find out whether their challenges with distractions is something that is medical in nature, something that can be formally diagnosed, or if they can just kind of try and use certain tools, some of the strategies that we've talked about today. Mm-hmm. How does one make that determination? How does one decide that I need to, like, this is bigger than just me and I need extra help in working through this? What's the best way to make that decision?
So a lot of people they kind of felt that something wasn't right their whole life, but they never really quite knew what it was. And oftentimes they're really good at school. If your audience doing numbers, so there's I don't know, it's not a school of thought, but there is it's too big a thing, but there is a thought that someone with ADHD, the worst job would be to go into accounting. But that isn't true. And I'll tell you why. Some of my best proofreaders that I've ever worked with have ADHD. I also have worked with some accountants that had ADHD. So for these people, it's like numbers is relaxing, or the navigating social situations can be very hard for some people with ADHD, not everybody. And so the numbers, there's just a very definitive, when you're there sort of thing. There's no puzzle to solve. But it might feel a fun puzzle, but it's not like this mystery social. Mm-hmm. But just imagine if you did well at school and you're working with numbers, it would be very easy for a professional to say, oh no, you don't have ADHD. So you might have been brushed aside for those reasons, or because you're a woman, or there's lots of reasons why it might have been brushed aside, but you might feel like there's always like something. A lot of people are misdiagnosed with anxiety and depression. They often go hand in hand with ADHD. But that doesn't mean to say you can't have ADHD as well. So if I could send you a link. There's a lot of like online screening. So if someone's thinking, do I not? You could take like a reputable screening. It's not a diagnostic tool, but it is enough. Like, is it worth pursuing this? And so that's like that would put anyone's mind at rest. The other thing is ADHD, unless you've had a head injury, it is something that you will have been born with, but it doesn't mean to say it was problematic until whenever. So some people get to university and all of a sudden it becomes problematic because perhaps they were at home and the home life was very structured and mom and dad were waking you up and giving you your meals, and then you had good relationship with your teachers with deadlines. So, and then all of a sudden you're at college or university, and you said earlier you were joking like you've got adult like late onset ADHD, and I mean it's fine to say that, but it's a possibility too. Like some people, when the hormones kick in around menopause, that's a sign. And like if life has changed, if you've been working in a structured environment for a company and then go out on your own with no external deadlines, that's when some people think, hang on a minute, I think I've got a problem here, but it might never have been detected before just because you just so happen to have like all the things that were working for you, and you didn't know you had ADHD because it was never problematic before.
Or you've been in situations whether you've put yourself there on purpose, knowingly or not. Like, I can think of situations where people may have gone into the military, and that's a very disciplined, place to be. And so it probably makes things really easy for you to get into that, get into certain habits. So if you do struggle with certain, challenges of distractions, ADD, ADHD, you don't necessarily see it because you've, created an environment that it doesn't really, you don't have, you're unable to be distracted, right? Like, so it helps you in some sense.
Oh.
And so when you come out of that situation, now it really begins to present itself so much more, right?
Yeah, that's like such a good example. That happens
Yeah.
a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely can see that happening. I know some folks who that have been in the military for years and thrived in the military, and then come out and it's a totally different. It's like it's like a train wreck, and you're like, what happened? And
Yeah,
so
exactly. Yeah.
I get it. This has been so enlightening. This I've learned so much talking with you today, Jacqueline, and I really feel like this is going to help someone in our audience with some of the things that they may be facing in their business, and really just helping them determine, like, is this just something that's the buzzword shiny object syndrome, or is this something deeper that I need to really dig into and figure out what tools I need, what strategies I need, what external assistance can I get to really help me do this better in my business and allow my business to thrive. And so for that, I appreciate you so much. Tell me, where can we find you online, because I know that somebody needs you. Somebody in our audience needs you.
Absolutely. So my website is called untappedbrilliance.com. And that got its name because a lot of my clients were saying, like, I've got so much potential, but I just can't like access it. So that's how it's got its name. I've also got a book that's by the same name, Untapped Brilliance. And then there's also a free Facebook group, Untapped Brilliance Club, and you people can join there and where we can connect with me and then lots of other people just like them.
That makes things so easy. Untapped Brilliance everywhere. The book, the Facebook group, the website. I absolutely love it. I know that we also talked about a tool that you actually have that can help people understand how to better utilize their strengths when it comes to overcoming distractions or overcoming uh, an ADHD kind of diagnoses and how you can really thrive. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Absolutely. So it's a free little mini book, and it's called 5 Ways to Master Your ADD Strengths Like a Pro. And so, but don't feel that you have to have ADD. You can just it still be helpful. So we all want to like work with our strengths rather than fighting against them. So it really tells you the steps on how to do that.
Okay, and we will definitely share the link in the show notes to all of that. We will share that there are 2 books that we'll share the links to, and we'll share the link to your website and your Facebook group, as well as to the mini book, the 5 Steps mini book. So thank you so much for making that available to us, and thank you so much for sharing your brilliance with us today. I again I'm enlightened and can't wait to pick up both books and really learn more about this particular topic.
Oh, wow. Awesome. Well, thank you, Kimberly.
This has been great. Jacqueline, you are welcome back to the Spark Hustle Flow podcast anytime. I'd love to have more conversations with you in the future. So thank you so much. You guys, that's it. That's a wrap for this episode. Thank you so much for spending the last half hour or so with us. I don't know if anybody started a timer when we started this, but I think it's time for Jacqueline and I to take a break. And so with that said, we will see you on our next episode. Remember, as always, be proactive, be productive, and be profitable. And ciao for now. Hey guys, thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Spark Hustle Flow podcast. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to subscribe, rate, and leave a positive review on Apple Podcasts. This helps other money pros just like you find the show and learn too. And if you want to hear more from me, follow Spark Hustle Flow across all social media channels and subscribe to my newsletter at sparkhustleflow.com/newsletter to get regular updates on what's happening in my world, weekly business development tips, and personal lessons I'm learning that can help you too. Again, that's sparkhustleflow.com/newsletter. That's it for this week. Remember, as always, be proactive, be productive, and be profitable. See you next week.